One of the best blessings of my life was to be a longtime colleague and close friend with Ralph Johnson. He was so courageous, so visionary, so fearless in the law, and so warm and giving. He was wind in the sails of future leaders. Sue Crystal, Rachel Pascal Osborne, Bob Anderson. When Ralph came into teaching in 1955, it's almost impossible for us now to realize how different being a law professor was then. You did traditional common law, and the many fields that bring all of us together this evening, none of that was taught in the law schools. Public law was taught hardly at all. Ralph, therefore, taught through the curriculum. Back then, you were expected to be able to teach any course in the curriculum. And so he bounced around, and there weren't as many specialties then, and not as many, I think, people with deep expertise in different fields. But times began to change, and in 1966, Ralph taught a property class and went up to his office, and there was a dozen Indians in there, being led by Hank Adams. And he said, "What do you guys want? What do you guys want?" And Adams said, "We want you to teach federal Indian law." And Ralph said, "I don't know a thing about federal Indian law." And Adams says, "That's the problem. We want to change that." And Ralph said, "Let me think about it." And then he said, "No, I'll do it." And as we know, boy, did he ever do it. And water law and coastal law and federal public land law and environmental law also. In 1970, the Puyallup 1 decision had come down, and what would become the Bolt decision was moving through the courts. And the court came out with a really bad decision and limited or suggested that construing Indian treaties was very different than it was. Ralph wrote a paper called "A Supreme Court Error." Now, back then, law professors didn't talk that way to the Supreme Court, but he did, and he wrote it and got it published. And a year later, there was one of the fish-ins on the Nisqually River, and Hank Adams was there, and he knew that Kathy Douglas was coming. A lot of young people came to the Northwest streams to support the tribes back then. And he found Kathy Douglas and introduced himself and said, "Could I ask you to take this law review article?" And in his hand, he gave Kathy Douglas his article about a Supreme Court error. And she said, "Sure." Now, we don't know what happened after that, except that 2 years later, Justice Douglas wrote on the same issue and never went back to the points he had made before. And that Puyallup 1, that part of the Puyallup 1 decision just disappeared. A couple of years later, mid-70s, or just before the Bolt decision, Ralph a couple of times said in public that the state was being racist against the tribes. And again, law professors didn't do stuff like that. And anytime it's difficult to do that in a public way, that's a word you don't want to use unless it's true and provable. And Ralph said it. In the early 80s, the Public Trust Doctrine was moving through the courts in California. And the Mono Lake case was in the Supreme Court. And there was a big conference at the University of California, Davis on that. And I remember it so well. I was talking and Ralph was talking. I was talking on public land law. Ralph was talking on water. And we kept getting calls saying that, well, we've changed the event location to a bigger room. And they got bigger and bigger and bigger because everybody was coming to this conference that clearly was so important for the future of California. And Ralph and I, both nights we were down there, had dinner just together, just the two of us. And Ralph just kept saying to me, look, if a fill goes into a navigable water course and affects navigation and other public values, that's a violation of public land law. Well, if a fill goes in and is a violation and impacts public land values, public law values, public trust doctrine issues, values, then that diversion of water ought to violate the public trust doctrine. If a fill does, so does a withdrawal of water. And Ralph says, what do you think about this? I'm going to say this tomorrow. I said, Ralph, good. But you know, nobody's ever said that before. And it was literally true. That point had never been made. Ralph made it. And in 1983, the Supreme Court of California ruled and wrote these words. If the public trust doctrine applies to in-stream fills that destroy navigation and other public trust values in navigable waters, it should be equally applicable to constrain the extraction of water that destroys navigation and other public interests. Both actions result in the same damage to the public interest. Those words came out of the law review article that Ralph wrote about putting his speech into the law review article. Those exact words, those are Ralph Johnson's words. If you read the Mono Lake decision, you will see that literally, the court went back and looked at a whole lot of public trust law in California, a very liberal state. Washington was liberal too at that time. And those words, when you look at it, were the only words that the court cited as being part of the public trust doctrine of California. And many, many words against it were to the contrary. It was Ralph Johnson's words against most California law on water diversions. And of course, the history is clear about all that's developed since then. Ralph drew such a bright line between right and wrong. His writing, his research, and his advocacy all glowed with it. And his life also glowed with the bright line between right and wrong. And we're so lucky to be able to have had Ralph and all he has left. Thank you.
Ralph founded the Center for Environmental Law and Policy at the University of Washington in 1993 to serve as a voice for public interest water resource management and preservation in Washington state. Professor Johnson recognized that water belongs to all of us and that the Public Trust Doctrine should be used to protect this precious resource for humans, wildlife, and life itself. With the leadership of Professor Johnson, CELP became an independent nonprofit in 1995. Professor Johnson passed away in 1999. CELP highlights from 1995 to 2001 established standing for citizen challenges to state water right decisions in 1995, won recognition of interrelationship between ground and surface waters in 1996, shut down issuance of new groundwater rights in Yakima River Basin in 1998, defeated the water squandering gold mine on Buckhorn Mountain in 2000, convinced ecology to meter all water rights in critical salmon watersheds in 2001.
Hi, I'm Steve Hirschey, and I want to congratulate Center for Environmental Law and Policy on the organization's 25th anniversary and extend a belated thank you to the early founders and supporters. I was asked, why do I support CELP, at least for the last 25 years? I think it's as simple as the public interest requires an interested public, and CELP has created that within Water Right Administration. Some of you may know that I worked with Ecology's Water Resources Program for over 20 years. And in the late 80s and the early 90s, I did a lot of water policy and procedure development for Water Right Administration. I knew firsthand then and now what was or was not considered in water right application decisions. And in the middle 90s, I was the Northwest Regional Office Section Supervisor for Water Resources Program. I was delegated authority to administer the water code in the 7-county area. And believe me, of the 4 parts test for a water right, public interest was the least understood or defined as to scope and as to use. Essentially, everything and anything was in the public interest. Historically, and still true mostly today, I believe water rights were a 2-party deal. We had the applicant and we had ecology. And CELP has been fundamental in the opening of the water right decision process to be a more holistic consideration of public values and the public interest. And while talk is great, it really was the appeal of decisions and pushing litigation at the Pollution Control Hearings Board and the courts that gave street credibility to CELP and made parties listen. As an environmental organization with a statewide view on in-stream flow values and how the public interest could be considered in water rights, that it would litigate, that was new. And believe me, it was different. Unfortunately, without the litigation, it's really hard to get the attention. And unfortunately, considerations of the public interest are becoming better defined and more mainstream in the world of water rights because of the work of CELP. And today we still need advocates for public values at the table, such as what CELP is providing with the Watershed Restoration Enhancement Committee work. And being at the table is key to developing a better framework for water management and actually knowing where the weaknesses of the existing system are. And I believe CELP is only at the table now as a credible voice because of the start 25 years ago. I trust that for years to come, CELP will be a respected voice at the table. And that is why I'm excited to support CELP now and into the future and wish it great success. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Melissa Bates.
And I'm Mike Marvich.
And together we form 2/3 of Aqua Permanente, a water watchdog group in Kittitas County.
In 1998, I was involved in a comp plan amendment addressing aquifer recharge.
And I had read Cadillac Desert previously, and then Mike and I met through a land use group concerned about rampant growth in the 2000s. So with Mike's encyclopedic knowledge of the Yakima Basin water history, I began to pester Tom Ring from the Yakima Nation. Finally, Tom said I needed to talk to somebody named Rachel Osborne. Thus began our involvement with CELP. So for perspective, when I started, my daughter was in kindergarten and she is now starting college. And Mike's cattle have retired. So CELP has played an important part of my life during these past 13 years. The highs and lows of trying to bring about environmental justice, the excitement of learning so much from so many, including this year's Water Hero recipient. Congratulations, Professor Anderson. I have loved every conference, gathering, especially, of course, the Roslyn Water Meeting right here in Kittitas County. Additionally, my daughter has grown up with such a great outlook on life, including as a youth plaintiff for Our Children's Trust. Thank you, Andrea Rogers. She'll be a future water warrior. I am grateful that CELP has enabled citizens like me and Mike to make a difference in the world. I'm also extremely grateful to have John and Rachel Osborne as my very best friends. Thank you, CELP, for all that you do. Congratulations on 25 years. Keep fighting the good fight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. This is Karen Alston
and Shirley Nixon. We're pleased to be part of CELP's 25th anniversary celebration and celebrate water activities honoring Bob Anderson as a water hero.
I was CELP's executive director from 2001 to 2006, and since then I've been an attorney for the Quinault Indian Nation out on the coast of Washington.
Karen hired me as staff attorney in 2002, and I became interim executive director after Karen left in 2006.
One of CELP's many strengths is that its expertise in Washington water law is deeper than any other environmental organization in Washington, and sometimes, we believe, even deeper than Ecology's own Water Resources Department.
And that's why CELP has won so many court cases challenging the state's dereliction of duty in managing the public's water.
Speaking of dereliction of duty, that's the title of one of CELP's comprehensive white paper research reports that was written and disseminated during our tenure.
These well-researched reports are packed with statistics and policy recommendations that are still relevant today, as CELP continues to defend the public interest in the public's water.
White papers like that form the factual backbone for CELP's work and influenced improved water law and policy changes. Here are a few.
The Columbia River Vision for Strong and Sustainable Water Management in November of 2000 resulted in numerous processes to further protect the river.
Dereliction of duty in 2002 highlighted how Washington's failure to have an accounting system for allocating water resulted in wasted water.
Washington's wasted water, how lax water efficiency laws waste millions of gallons and millions of dollars, another 2002 report, talked about how there needed to be better efficiency and metering of Washington's municipal as well as irrigation water and other water uses. It resulted in the founding of the Partnership for Water Conservation, which was a joint effort between municipal water suppliers and environmental organizations that looked at water use efficiency.
Water is Worth It was a white paper published in 2005 making the case for a water management fee. We successfully used that report to lobby for a change in the water right application fee. Since 1917, it had been $10, and the legislature in 2005 increased that to $50 and included, for surface water diversions, a volumetric amount of fee.
In researching these reports and helping win cases and legislative victories that sprang from them, CELP received priceless aid from interns, volunteers, board members, and pro bono professionals of all types. It helped to have a spacious office with many workstations and a large conference room at 2400 North 45th Street in Wallingford. Perhaps some of you remember that. It was kitty corner across from the Erotic Bakery, a landmark everyone knew that helped them find our offices.
Because CELP's work during our tenure was really bolstered by all of this amazing volunteer work, we wanted to just name a few, but not all, of the people who tirelessly worked on CELP's behalf.
There were Kevin Klingbeil, Kathy George, Brian Motto, Sherry Bossy, Julie Taylor, Sean Mary Helen Johnson, Oksana Bilobran,
Naomi Stacy, Charlotte Stevenson, Roger Goldfinger, Michael Harris, Holly Brauckley, Jeremy Eckert.
And Julie Gerard, Barbara Dote, Barbara Floyd, Betsy Dennis, Benella Caminetti, who can forget her, and Janet Nazy.
We're so proud to be part of CELP's history.
And we want to thank you for continuing to support CELP's work.
More victories from 2001 to 2007. Established via lawsuits against water conservancy boards that their decisions are subject to open meetings and public disclosure laws. Became first environmental group to hold a seat on the DOH Water Supply Advisory Committee. Enforcement of metering lawsuit win, forcing ecology to require metering of new water rights and all surface water diversions.
Hello everyone, my name is Barry Goldstein. I was on the board of CELP from 2001 to 2008, and I was the board president in the last few years of that time period. I'm thrilled that CELP is still around, that we're celebrating its 25th anniversary, and I'm really honored to be a little part of this big celebration of its great ongoing work. I'm a geologist. I teach at the University of Puget Sound, and I study landscape and climate change, and a big part of that is looking at how river systems develop and how they form. And that was part of my original connection with CELP as I got more interested in the modern day version of rivers and how we could effectively manage them. What I've liked about CELP from the very beginning is the fact that it cuts right to the issues. We hold people accountable and organizations accountable by the law, and that we try and keep an even balance, the environment and people's use of it, but we always keep the law above everything else, and that's very important to me, and I know that our work is still going on in that same vein. During the time that I was associated with CELP, we had a bunch of highs and also some lows at the beginning. We got very deeply involved in the WIRA process. I actually had a sabbatical in the middle of that time period where I spent a fair amount of time going around to a lot of the different meetings, the different WIRAs, and I learned a lot, and I was sort of a placeholder for CELP, so I was able to act as a sort of a mini employee for that time period. Towards the end of the time period, funding started to get a little tight, and then the recession hit, but we were able to make it through, and again, I'm just thrilled that we're still in full operation. A lot of people to thank, but in particular, I want to thank Rachel and John Osborne, and of course the Johnson family. Thank you again, and let's continue for the next 25 years.
My name is John Osborne. I'm a physician and conservationist. I am a former board president for CELP. I served in that capacity for 9 years, from 2007 until 2016. I want to focus on some of the wins during that 9-year period, particularly looking at the era of efforts by the Washington State Department of Ecology to build new irrigation dams in eastern Washington. In 2007, the recently created Office of Columbia River, which is the state's dam building agency, unveiled a series of new dam proposals for eastern Washington, one of the most heavily dammed areas in the world if you look at the Columbia River and the 4 Lower Snake River dams and dams on river tributaries. So kind of walking you through some of those dam proposals. One was Hawk Creek, which was a $6 to $8 billion dam proposal. Pump storage, pumping water up out of the Columbia into a reservoir in Hawk Creek, which is not too far from where the Spokane flows into the Columbia, which is now Roosevelt Reservoir. So we worked with local residents, in particular Yvonne Geisler-Eiler, who's a third-generation rancher from the Hawk Creek area. Her dad was still alive and still living there. And Yvonne and I went back to Washington, D.C. We walked the halls of Congress and met with agencies. Really, I think, a very powerful experience for Yvonne to do that. So we also teamed with Sierra Club's Upper Columbia River Group to do outings and to give visibility to Hawk Creek. To keep that dam from going forward, and ultimately Washington State backed off, as did the Bureau of Reclamation. The second dam proposal I want to talk about is Crab Creek. This was a $3 billion dam proposal that would have been built in the Lower Crab Creek area, would have flooded wildlife refuges, both state and federal. This is an incredibly important place. You may have heard of the Sandhill Crane Festival that's held in Othello. There are thousands of sandhill cranes and thousands of other birds that migrate through into these habitats and protected refuges, and the dam would have flooded and drowned these refuges. The leader champion in this effort was the daughter of Aldo Leopold. Some of you may know Estella Leopold. And her leadership helped save Lower Crab Creek and helped stop that dam. And in 2008, the Bureau of Reclamation eliminated Lower Crab Creek as a dam site. I'm not sure that Washington State's Department of Ecology, their Office of Columbia River, has yet relinquished Lower Crab Creek, but certainly the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation did. Next is Shanker's Bend Dam. This was a dam proposal up on the Similkameen River, which is an international river, much of which is in Canada. It's a free-flowing river except for one cement plug at the lower end called Enload Dam. It's a century-old dam that needs to come out. The new dam, Shanker's Bend, would have flooded out a popular fishing lake called Palmer Lake. It would have flooded over a Superfund site, and it would have backed water across the international boundary into the lands of the lower Similkameen Band. This drew substantial opposition from officials in Canada, and eventually, in 2011, the Okanagan PUD abandoned the license that had been issued to it for building that dam. This was another dam proposal paid for by Washington State taxpayers, vigorously opposed by CELP, and a dam proposal that has been put back up on the shelf. Perhaps dams are like zombies. They never really die. They just go back up on the shelf until proponents find a convenient time. I want to talk about a fourth dam, and that's Black Rock Dam. This was really a dumb idea. This has been a massive dam built on unstable geology up gradient from the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. So you have to picture water being pumped up out of the Columbia, filling up a reservoir in the Black Rock Valley, up gradient from the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, where we already have problems with plumes underground moving toward the Columbia River. And that water then eventually would have been pumped over into the Yakima. We did a lot of work, again, with Sierra Club, and we worked with the Yakima Nation opposing that dam. We went and met door to door with landowners in the Black Rock Valley, and eventually in 2008, the Bureau of Reclamation pulled the plug on the Black Rock Dam. CELP did a huge amount of work, including looking at conservation, water conservation, appropriate crops, and other opportunities to reduce the demand on limited water supply in the Yakima Valley. Finally, I want to talk about what is really perhaps the most visible victory by CELP and with Sierra Club in eastern Washington, and that's restoring water to the waterfalls in downtown Spokane. The waterfalls had been dewatered and dry for nearly a century. Vista Corporation diverted most of the river into its powerhouse. Labor Day weekend, you could drop down into the waterfall area. It was totally quiet, and it smelled of dead fish. With CELP's leadership, we had an opportunity, and that was that Avista had to relicense its dam projects on the Spokane River. We used the Clean Water Act and the 401 certification process to protect the aesthetic values of Spokane Falls, and through that, restored the waterfalls. So today, if you go down in the summertime and early fall to downtown Spokane, be sure to go to the waterfalls. It is a place of extraordinary beauty, and it's a place of life. The waterfalls have returned, and that's the work of CELP and CELP's leadership, along with support from the community and in our work with Sierra Club's Upper Columbia River Group.
More victories from 2007 to 2016 helped win recognition of counties' responsibilities to protect in-stream flows and existing water rights in issuing building permits in 2011, defeated legislation that would have allowed new wells to suck dry environmental flows in rivers throughout western Washington in 2012, required Spokane County's new wastewater treatment plant to limit new discharges of PCBs into the Spokane River in 2013, organized an international alliance to support modernizing the Columbia River Treaty between the U.S. and Canada in 2014.
Hi, I'm Larry Wasserman, and it's my great pleasure to be able to acknowledge the work that CELP's done over the last 25 years in protecting water quality and water quantity in Washington State. I was fortunate enough to start working with Rachel in the mid-90s on these water issues, and clearly CELP would not be what it is today without the hard work, diligence, perseverance, and just stick-to-itiveness that Rachel's brought to the organization over these last decades. The thing that is most overwhelming about CELP is its consistency over the last 25 years. Many other environmental organizations have dabbled in the water quality protection, water quantity protection, but really haven't stuck to it for the long term, and they've been somewhat wavering in how they've approached these water issues. CELP has been straightforward and consistent, sending the right messages to the legislature, litigating the difficult issues when they needed to be litigated. And so I think it gives the tribes and me personally a sense of comfort when I work with CELP to know where they're coming from, and then I can count on their word. Whether it's Trish or Don or Bruce, it's been great to work with them through the past years. And I think it's also important to point out that, again, with all the environmental organizations that I've dealt with, CELP has been most supportive and can be counted on the most with regard to their engagement with tribes. No other organization has reached out to the tribes, worked so closely with us, and I think that's important because it shows us who our allies and friends are, and that it's not just ephemeral switching from issue to issue. As you know, CELP has taken on the most difficult legal issues, and even when they haven't been won, it lets the legislators and others know that they're a force to be reckoned with, and that there's no free pass in trying to slide things through that hurt the environment. I guess, to me, the issue that's been most in the front in working with CELP over the last 20 years has been the groundwater issues. They've been in the forefront of that, whether it's in Ellensburg, here in the Skagit, and around the state. And so I think Washington State is a better place for CELP's 25 years of engagement. I hope they'll be here for another 25 years, and it's really been my pleasure and honor to work with them. Good luck, and look forward to working with you more in the future.
Some victories 2017 to recent ensured that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Leavenworth National Fish Hatchery will begin monitoring and reporting its pollution discharge into Icicle Creek in 2017, took the first steps to remove the Enlow Dam alongside partner organizations by filing several lawsuits that in part pressured the Okanagan County Public Utility District to table plans to re-electrify the dam in 2018, coordinated our first Clean and Abundant Water Lobby Day, assembling a coalition of people from across Washington to raise their voices in support of our water resources in 2019, helped protect the Dungeness River in 2019.
So why do we need kelp? Well, first of all, water law and related processes are complicated, and water law in particular is arcane. For advocates of rivers and aquifers, the cards are often stacked against us. The rewards within the system favor taking water out of stream. Water is life. Water is also political currency. And the Department of Ecology is funded to exploit waters of the state, resulting in overallocation of the state's waters, and the result is ultimately dewatering rivers and drinking water aquifers. The Attorney General and the Attorney General's staff and resources fully back the Department of Ecology. And when we challenge the state in the state courts, the judges, including the state Supreme Court, give really substantial deference to the Department of Ecology. So the cards are truly stacked against advocates for the public interest and keeping water in stream. Our rivers and our streams, our drinking water aquifers, need a watchdog. They need an organization that is willing to undertake the hard-edged advocacy to keep water in stream, to keep our rivers flowing. That organization is CELP.